Okay, well, welcome. I can't believe this is the last class. I'm sad, but we will, I'm sure we'll see each other again. I'm going to, let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, we're in Beyond the Basics class. Leftovers from last week. So someone had volunteered to show us, I believe, how to find historical societies on Family Search. Does that ring a bell with anybody? And does anybody want to show us that? If you want to unmute and tell me if I gave you that assignment. I'm sorry I didn't write your name down.
Well, that was me, and I failed to find the location I thought through Family Search to go to Facebook groups, because there's a number of Facebook groups
Okay.
for genealogical work, Northern Europe, just a number of them. Whatever your particular country of interest is, you can find it.
Okay.
You can also go through Family Search to get into similar groups, okay? But I think through the wiki, I believe you can go find that,
Okay.
where there are groups that would probably chat with you or help you.
Okay. Great.
You've got mail.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome to find that. So another great resource that we should look into. Okay. This week, we're going to be talking about analysis, and with the N2, have I proven this connection? To me, this is the hardest thing to do in genealogy. I am real nervous about saying something is proven. And I remember going to my professor at one point and saying, this is what I've got on this connection. Have I proven it? And he looked at me and said, Susan, you have proven it 5 times over. So I'm cautious about these sorts of things, and getting the confidence to say, no, this is proven is, again, the hardest thing that I know to do. So it's going to take some practice to do this. But today we're going to talk about the theory behind the proof, and hopefully that will give you some confidence and some guidelines about figuring out if your linkage is proven. And then we're going to talk about some case studies that illustrate those points. So, boy, I pray my brain works today, because this theory is a little bit complicated and hard to explain. Please stop me if I'm not explaining it well enough, if you're not understanding, and I'll try to say it in a different way that might make it a little more understandable. Okay, so we can't really talk about genealogical proofs without talking about Elizabeth Shown Mills. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her. She is a luminary in genealogy. She probably has as much, post Alex Haley, she's the most influential genealogist. And her contributions have been codifying research methodology, the genealogical proof standard, and citations. The book that you see there is one of her books, Evidence, Citation and Analysis for the Family Historian. Before Elizabeth Shown Mills, genealogy as a field was not that highly respected by historians. She brought all of these ingredients up to a standard that any scholar would find satisfying and would find appealing. And so now historians tend to look on us as peers, as colleagues. And we have a standing with them because of her, because she's done these things. We'll get citations out of the way first, because she is a stickler on citations. And let me explain what her philosophy is. Any statement of fact that is not common knowledge must carry its own individual statement of source. You probably know that. You probably, if you've written a paper, you know that if it's not common knowledge, you need to put a footnote there, right? That's what she's saying. Now, our statements of fact are not, we're usually not writing reports, right? So our statements of fact are the actual names, dates, and places that we have. So when we state so-and-so was born on a particular date and at a particular place, we need to have our own individual statement of source. Okay, she says that explicit source notes should appear on ancestor charts and family group sheets. I have seen this before, but few and far between. Most people's pedigree charts and family group sheets do not have sources attached. Is it a good thing? Oh yeah, it's a really good thing. I don't know how you do it. I don't believe you can do it through Family Search. When you print up your pedigree chart from Family Search, I don't believe any of the sources that you have for that person show up. And in fact, none of the sources are tied to a particular date or a particular place for that person. So I don't know how it would, I don't know how they would show all the sources. They would just kind of be meaningless because they're not attached to a particular date or place. But here's an example. She has an example in her appendix. If you can read that, the copy isn't great, but you'll notice there is a number after each name, date, and place, pretty much everyone. And then, so this is what a documented pedigree chart looks like. And then here are the sources attached, some of the sources attached to that sheet. I haven't done this. I don't know how to do this with Family Search now, but it's a really good idea. I think it's, as we'll discuss, it's a really important thing. Citations, another thing she says that full citation should be affixed to the front side of every photocopied document. This book, I think, was published in 1997, really before the internet took off. And this is a good idea. I follow her. Her reasoning is that if we write on the back of a document the full citation, if that doesn't get photocopied the next time around, then that citation gets lost. Now things have changed with we're scanning documents, or we're making digital images, and we're downloading digital images from databases. There is a way, which I don't know how to do, but to make that image smaller to create margins along the edge of the page. And that gives you the space to put in the citation on the front. And that is preferable. Now the way that I operate is I've shown you my notes in my genealogical software, and I have a note on each source, and I put the full citation in my notes there. The problem with that is that the documents themselves can't stand alone. It requires somebody who has access to my genealogical software and can look at my notes and can see that citation, and then they'll see, oh, that's connected to this document, which she is labeled with this name, and so they can make that connection. this is, I don't know what she would say today. She is still alive, and maybe she's commented on this, but I haven't heard her say anything about how to do this, except to get in the habit perhaps of shrinking the image so that you can put the citation on the front. Now, why is all this important? Why are citations so important? Like the best scientific studies, our trees are subject to peer review. Peer review means these are people that are subject, these are our peers, are our colleagues, are people that are looking at our trees, and they are looking at our trees and they're reviewing it and they're seeing if they agree with it. And so that is a good thing. Peer-reviewed studies always carry more weight than non-peer-reviewed studies. That's just how they are. Could somebody admit Kathleen Black? In order to get her in, I have to exit the lecture. I don't know if Chelsea, you can do that, or Carrie Ann.
I don't see her trying to get in. Sorry,
Oh.
it's not showing up on my screen.
Okay.
Oh wait, oh here it is at the bottom. Sorry,
Okay.
got it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. So peer-reviewed studies always carry more weight than non-peer-reviewed. Why? Because there are multiple eyes looking at it that are telling you if they agree or disagree, and that makes the work more valid. And this applies to our work as well. Our trees are subject to peer review. We won't probably, I mean, sometimes you find this, but we won't find people, writing papers about, whether they agree with our tree or not and why they do or why they don't. But as they look at our trees on Family Search, they can add a note and they can change what we put if they disagree. Our trees are subject to peer review, and that is a good thing. So back to citations. Why are citations important in respect to peer reviews, being peer reviewed? Others can't possibly evaluate our work without looking at the documents upon which our conclusions are based. So they can't determine the validity of what we've put there unless they look at the sources that we have used to create, to add that data. All of this makes me think that somehow we ought to, when we include our source, write a note, and you can do that in sources, right? You can add information, write a source about what that source applies to. This tells us applies to the birth and marriage information, or this applies to, the place they were born, etc. That would be something in the citation that would help a reviewer to follow our thinking. Citations should facilitate others checking our sources. We should make it as easy as possible for them. And so those notes, whether it's you add a note in Family Search to say, this source in particular I was using for this reason. I think if you're talking about each individual source, it probably makes more sense to write something very short in the source itself, in that source citation itself, to indicate what you're using it for. But anything you can do, I mean, that the underlying principle that will dictate what you end up doing is that you are trying to make it as easy as possible for somebody to understand your thinking and why you've come to the conclusions that you have. Okay, citations, Elizabeth Shown Mills style. She developed her codification of citations from the Chicago Manual of Style. Some of you may be familiar with that. I think English majors use that, I believe. They might use the MLA. Anyway, historians use it, but she had to make departures and modifications and additions because our field is so unique. How do you write a citation for a monumental inscription, for a what's on a gravestone? How do you record that? She tells us in this book. She's got an example of cemetery inscriptions and how to cite those. And so there are a lot of records that we use a lot that in other fields, there's very scanty, if any, use of. And so she created, styles for each of these local governments, churches, cemeteries, and family archives that you wouldn't find anywhere else. So she's given us a way to record, to cite these kinds of sources that aren't used in other disciplines. And it's great to have that guideline, and it really provides, she's just really brilliant with what she records. It's concise, but it tells everything it needs to. Again, the underlying principle is that you want to make it as easy as possible for somebody to find and review your sources. Our citations also need more detail because we analyze historical evidence with greater precision. She's not saying there that we're more precise than historians or that historians don't get into details. Here's an example of, I think, what she's talking about here. We ran into this situation in a class I was taking. There was a will that read, I leave to my daughter, Bessie, the cow. I hear some laughter. Yes. A footnote to that might have a further explanation beyond just the footnote saying, pay particular attention to where the comma is, the placement of the comma, right? So I leave to my daughter, Bessie, the cow. I leave to my daughter, Bessie, comma, the cow. I leave to my daughter, comma, Bessie, the cow. Was the cow's name Bessie or was the daughter's name Bessie? We don't want to add a cow to a family group sheet, right? It's kind of important we figure out where the comma is. I think that's the kind of detail that we need to get to in genealogy that may not be required in history. It's those kinds of details that really make or break our studies, right? And that, you could have a completely false daughter there. It turned out that Bessie was the cow and was not a daughter. So, anyway, we need to be more precise because of details like that. Now, I would not want my Elizabeth Shown Mills to review my citations. She is a stickler, a little intimidating, but she also has a sense of humor. I'm pretty sure she's quoting a student when she says, someone asked her, when I put my name on the title page, do I have to cite my birth certificate, right? So a little bit of humor there, a little bit of citation humor. No, you don't need to cite your birth certificate when you put your name on the title page. Anyway, she does have a sense of humor. Now, any questions about citation? We're moving on to her methodology codification. Feel free to unmute if you have a question. Okay, we'll move on to methodology and what she did for methodology. She created a course at Samford University called Advanced Methodology. I've been to Samford and have taken classes. I've never taken her advanced methodology class. However, these are the steps that she would include in her methodology. And this is big picture methodology, not what to do when we're looking at, how to research. So I'll give you some examples of some specific methodology. When you've got 3 people with the same name and one is your ancestor, how do you determine which one is your ancestor? Well, you marry and bury the other ones. You marry and or bury the other ones. You find out if they married the person that your ancestor did. If not, they're the other one. And you bury, if someone dies before your ancestor did, then they're not yours. Anyway, that's a methodology. That's a specific methodology for a specific genealogical problem. This is an overall methodology of what makes for good genealogical research. The first step is research. That's no surprise. We need to research. Remember that our research involves choosing a very discrete, specific research objective. So it's not only finding the father of John Smith, but I will look at the marriage record of John Smith to determine his parents' names. Very specific. Okay, now evidence. What does she mean by evidence? Well, we gather all of these records that pertain to our research objective. And within those documents, there is evidence. And what makes it evidence is that it pertains to our research objective. If it doesn't pertain to our research objective, we're likely to ignore it for this at this time. We may use those sources later for other reasons, for other purposes, but we gather evidence because we're trying to prove or disprove a point. And so the evidence is not the whole document, but it's the information within the document that gives us the information about our research objective. That is the evidence. Citation, again, that's a really important step in having a good presentation, a good conclusion, because it shows that we're willing to have it peer reviewed, right? Then the end is analysis. We need to analyze that evidence and show our analysis so that others can see what we're talking about. Okay, she advocates a critical approach. And I love these statements of hers. The fact that words are spoken or written on a sheet of paper does not make them true. We know that. I mean, my dad used to say, tell me something that happened. I said, oh, where did you hear that? And he said, hey, it was in the newspaper. It must be true. He was joking, that's actually not true. Okay. The appearance of a name, date, place, or statement of relationship on a frame of film or in a database somewhere in cyberspace, or I would add on a tree in Ancestry, does not make that information true. We know that. Okay. I love this statement of hers. The past we explore and the people we seek are a fascinating, I can't read that, spiral of false leads, confused identities, and tangled lives. As family historians, we inherit the job of unearthing every clue and weighing every fragment of evidence so carefully that we can piece together an accurate mosaic of each ancestral life. Okay, I love that statement. That's a really great statement of what we do and what we're up against and our job. And you can see that not only did she codify these things for our discipline, but she was a really good writer. She really writes well and expresses these things precisely and beautifully. Okay, this means several things. You will find contradictory information. If you do enough research, you will find contradictory information. Published facts need verification. We need to question the knowledge and motives of each document's author or source. We try to identify bias or motive for gain. I would add, we also might look at state of mind. For instance, in a death certificate, the informant might be overcome with grief. They're in a state of shock, perhaps. And so they may know very well their parents, but, or their, it may even be their brother's parents who are their parents. But if they're grieving, they might write something down wrong. So we need to take that possibility into account when we're looking at death certificates, right? We need to be cautious. We need to observe critically. We need to record carefully. We need to weigh the body of evidence, analyze parts and whole. So let's talk about parts and whole. Analyze parts, that's again, analyzing each document for its trustworthiness and for any bias or motive or state of being that the source might have been in, that the author might have been in. That's analyzing the parts as we go along. I'm not so sure about this. I had a great grandmother who I learned from my dad was very theatrical in the way she spoke and in her presence. And she was an organizer. She had Red Cross drives. She had a literary club society, and that was always put in the paper. She cared about appearances. And I found that and she was a genealogist. She loved to do genealogy. She didn't record any of her sources, but she loved, I've never found anything negative that she's written. She's always put a very positive spin on everything. So when I read what she writes, I look at it critically and I say, I need verification for this because, she's trying to sell me something about her heritage, and I want to make sure we get it right and not get the glossed over parts. So we analyze the parts. We look at the people. We look at their possible motivations. We look at the whole and analyze the whole. What is the whole body of evidence? Where does it bring us? And with that composite, is there enough evidence that we really have a pretty good case? Or, I think, I'm leaning towards one thing, and that leads us to the next thing. We have theories. We look at the body of evidence, the whole of it, and we go, this looks to me like this might be the case. And that's our working theory. And there's nothing wrong with having theories. In fact, I don't know how
You've got mail.
I don't know how you do research without having theories. But we can't have favorites. We can't have a theory and then say, therefore, I'm going to find all those resources that are going to prove what I believe to be true. No, it's a theory that we hold on to briefly, and we try to disprove it as hard as we try to prove it. So the theories need, if we're at the theory stage where the body of evidence isn't enough that we feel like we have proven it, then obviously research continues. Okay. Why? Why are these research steps so important? Historical and genealogical truths are elusive. Prior to DNA, the proof of familial relationships was based on assumption and trust. We can never prove a relationship conclusively. Okay, let's talk about this a little bit. I think with DNA, we can prove a relationship conclusively now. It's pretty conclusive if you have your dad's Y DNA, if you're a male. Paternity is pretty, we can prove that. We can prove stuff through DNA. We can't prove everything, but some things we can be definitively proved. However, the paper trail that we are gathering and uncovering and putting together is a tentative tree. Familiar relationships are based on assumption and trust. You know, your dad's your dad. Your grandparents are your grandparents, right? There's a certain amount of trust that goes with that, and a certain amount of we just assume it's true. And your paper trail will probably, verify that, because that's the way it was. Now, when we get into DNA, sometimes there are some surprises out there. So are you interested in getting your biological ancestry correct? If you are, then you need to use DNA, and you need to correlate the DNA trail with your paper trail. And that is the closest that you're going to get to your real biological tree. If you don't do the DNA, then you're looking at the people who raised your family and going back, and that's very valid. Those are arguably the people that had the most influence on your family besides genetics, right? And so I'm talking nurture nature here, and that debate is still ongoing, but that's a valid way to do it. But if you're concerned about getting the biology correct, then DNA is a must. Okay. Each generational connection, we assert, is simply a decision based on the evidence we've gathered. Therefore, we need to gather the best possible evidence. So that's making our decisions sound more tentative than I think they are, but it's actually correct. The way to prove that is that the decision that I have a particular linkage might be overthrown by the discovery of a different record or several more records coming to light, right? So these connections are decisions that we've made based on the evidence. And so the tentativeness of that is unsettling to me, but it's also freeing in a way that, no, I can make this decision based on the evidence that I have now, but I'm not saying that I'm writing it in stone. It could be overturned in the future. I could find something completely different in the way of my line, and I'm willing, because based on the evidence I have now, which has been pretty exhaustive, I am pretty confident that this decision is correct. But I'm still open, right? You're still open to seeing other things. The quality of interpretation and analysis of that evidence will determine the success of our research. So we need to interpret the evidence correctly and analyze that evidence correctly. Okay, as part of the gathering, as part of the research, we need to consult all available sources, and especially look for mutually independent sources. What do I mean by that? The example that she uses in the book is a trial from 1742 where there was fraudulent testimony given. And in the 19th century, a writer read about the trial and recorded the same testimony, which was fraudulent, but used that testimony in their analysis of what happened at the trial. And then in the 21st century, there's a tree that uses that information to put a connection in their tree. So we've got three different sources. We've got the court case in 1742, we've got the 19th century writer, and we've got the tree. But they are not mutually independent. They're relying on each other, or the two later ones are relying on that one original testimony, which was actually a lie, which was actually not correct. So these are not mutually independent sources. The last two are rehashes of the first. So they're three different sources, yes, but they're not mutually independent. We need to look and find mutually independent sources. That increases the likelihood that we're going to get good information. Okay, the end result can be one of three things. And a combination of these, but just to categorize for the sake of clarity, for the sake of understanding this, we could have multiple pieces of evidence that strongly support one conclusion. And that is what I call the slam dunk. Okay, we love it. We got it. There's no question about it. Everything that we look at strongly supports one conclusion for this connection. We all love it when that happens. And it does happen, but unfortunately doesn't happen all the time. Okay, the second situation that we have multiple pieces of evidence that are not direct, but together build a strong case for one conclusion. That is a direct support, a direct piece of evidence would be a birth certificate that says that John's parents were James and Mary, right? And that is direct evidence. Indirect evidence would be, nothing direct, but you can come to that conclusion based on other records. And again, you've got multiple pieces of evidence that together build a strong case for one conclusion. That's about as strong an argument as the slam dunk. That's a pretty good conclusion. Then you can have multiple pieces of conflicting evidence, whether direct, indirect, or a combination. This requires evaluating the evidence and weighing for credibility. And if you deem resolution as possible, you show how in a clear and convincing way that you have resolved the conflicting evidence. And this requires an explanation. So the first possibility, the slam dunk, doesn't require a lot of explanation. It should be pretty self-evident in the records that you've discovered and in the evidence that you've drawn from them. The second one requires some explanation. You're going to need to tell how those different pieces build together to make that strong case for one conclusion. And then the third one requires actually a lot, where you need to give your thought process, your logic, and you need to write about why that conflicting evidence doesn't prevent you from coming to a very strong conclusion. And that will require, the use of the other records and how you combine them, how you interpret them, and why you get there. Okay. Whatever the case, the decision needs to be clearly written, showing a summary of the problem and the records consulted, of course, with meticulous citations, then showing logical reasoning to convince others that our conclusion is justified. Okay. Any questions? We're done with citations and with methodology. Anything that's clear as mud? Okay, let's keep going then. We're going to talk about GPS. This is not maps. This is the genealogical proof standard. Now, before Elizabeth Shown Mills, the legal proof standard was used a lot. And if you're familiar with legal proof standards, either by watching LA Law or or going to law school, whatever, you'll know that there is clear and convincing evidence, and then there's a preponderance of the evidence. Those are two standards used to decide a case, to decide if a case is proven. Elizabeth Shown Mills tweaked these a little bit because she is uncomfortable with the legal proof standard, and I'll explain why. For clear and convincing evidence, which would be our slam dunk. Another way of saying that is beyond a reasonable doubt. In different jurisdictions, that legal proof of clear and convincing has different definitions. So it can be anywhere between beyond a reasonable doubt, which is really, really well proven, to a preponderance of the evidence. And she was uncomfortable with the sliding scale there. And so her clear and convincing is clear and convincing and not going towards the preponderance of the evidence. It's again, our slam dunk. The preponderance of the evidence legal proof standard is a lot like our, combination of records to prove what we believe to be true. The problem that she sees with using the preponderance of the evidence is, as a legal term, is that their case was the preponderance of the evidence by the time of the trial. And so there was a deadline. But at the time of the trial, this was the evidence that had been gathered, and this was the preponderance of the evidence. And we need to decide the case based on the evidence that has been gathered thus far. With us, we don't have a timeline. We don't have a deadline. And so our preponderance of the evidence, we have time to accumulate a lot of evidence. We don't have any, timeline or deadline breathing down our backs. So with those tweaks, it's pretty much the same thing if you keep those asterisks in mind that she placed to the legal proof standard. Okay. Another way of stating it, and this is by the Board of Certified Genealogists, of which Elizabeth Shown Mills was the president, and she's behind the 5 elements of the genealogical proof standard. So here's another way of stating, if to see if you've proven something. Number 1, a reasonably exhaustive search has been conducted. It's exhaustive, not exhausting. We're not recording the number of times when we fell asleep at our laptop or, worked late into the hours and we're exhausted. No, exhaustive means thorough and comprehensive. Reasonably comprehensive. You tell me what that means. What is reasonably comprehensive? Well, it's looking at all the records that we have access to, that we can. Doesn't mean that we've got access to all the records that were ever created. We don't, and we never will, probably. Because a lot of records that were created have been destroyed. There have been fires. There have been mice eating through records. So we'll never see every record that's been created that pertains to our search. So reasonably exhaustive, reasonably comprehensive. We need to look at the records that are available. The second thing is each statement of fact has a complete and accurate source citation. Again, why it allows for peer review. I think we've covered that pretty well. The evidence is reliable and has been skillfully correlated and interpreted. Remember, the evidence is the information that we gather from our sources that is applicable to our research objective. Now, what does it mean that it's been skillfully correlated? That means that the evidence that we've pulled has been correlated to our research objectives. So we've pulled information from this record that we believe is applicable to our research objective, but we need to show how it's applicable to our research objective. We need to explain that. We need to make sure that they're tied together, that they're correlated. And then interpreted, again, our interpretation includes what the meaning of the words is, what we think about the author and their motives and who they were and whether they're reliable. Interpretation has a lot of factors in it. And so we need to spend time correlating and interpreting the evidence. Any contradictory evidence has been resolved, and that's based on the correlation and interpretation, logical reasoning that sustains resolution. So all of that, we need to show that. We need to show our correlation and interpretation and our logical reasoning. Again, when there's contradictory evidence, that requires more explanation. So in this, she wrote these things for papers that are presented. We're using these in notes on Family Search. And so, but it's the same thing. We need to make sure that we write down our correlation and our interpretation and our logical reasoning. If we do, people aren't going to come along and change what we've done. I think it becomes less likely. We can't make a blanket statement that nobody will ever change it, but it becomes much less likely that anybody would dare to touch it if we explain our reasoning, if we explain these things. Okay. And then the last one, the conclusion has been soundly reasoned and coherently written. Okay, soundly reasoned, we need to make sure that we're logical and that, A plus B equals C, that works. And then coherently written is a completely different animal. So not only are we reasoning well, but and this last one is a much harder skill. We can communicate that reasoning to others. We may have sound reasoning, but when we try to explain that to other people, it becomes more difficult, doesn't it, to put it into words? How do we make sure that we're writing coherently? There are things that we can do to help us to write in a way that other people will understand. One way is to have a family member or a friend read what we've written and ask them if it makes sense to them. Sometimes we're so immersed in this that it makes total sense to us, and somebody looking at it will go, I'm not following you here. And that's so helpful to have that second set of eyes, even a third set of eyes, right? That can tell us when what we're writing isn't communicating well our reasoning. The second thing, and I rely on this a lot more, is writing and then setting it aside and then coming back to it later. I can remember writing a paper when I went back to school. And so when I went back to school, I had taken off, 20 years. I waited till my youngest was in school all day long before I went back to school. And I hadn't written anything but a grocery list for 20 years. So I go back to school and all of a sudden I'm having to write and I'm not very confident and I'm thinking, I don't know if I can do this. So having others help me, my husband looked at my writing, I had friends look at my writing, but something else that I did all the time I remember writing a paper and getting done before it was time to turn it in, which was unusual for me. I procrastinated less as I got older. I finished the paper maybe a week before it was due. I set it aside. I thought it was a pretty good paper. I just was going to come back to it to make sure there were no, no typos or whatever little problems. A couple of days later, I go back to it and I read it, and it is awful. And I think, I thought this was good. This is terrible. It's really bad. Sometimes, again, we're in the zone, we're in a frame of mind, and we write, and then we leave that frame of mind and go about our business, and then come back, and lo and behold, we realize that in that frame of mind, we're not doing a very good job of communicating to people in different frames of mind, like your professor. So it's always helpful if you add a note, and the more complicated it is and the more complex it is, the more this applies, to set it aside and to come back and look at it and make sure that it still makes sense to you. Okay. So the $1 million question, have we proven a linkage? When we are convinced, this is a quote by Elizabeth Shown Mills, when we are convinced that all valid evidence points to a conclusion that we and others of experience and rational thinking can accept as clearly convincing, then we may be ready to present our case. And that's daunting. What that gives me, there are several of my lines that I'm not sure about, that haven't proven yet to my satisfaction. And that's okay. Because I'm not ready to present my case yet, because I don't think it's clearly convincing. And that's okay. We just keep working on it. We just keep gathering more, more evidence. And we will reach a point where we can reach a conclusion, in all likelihood. But don't be in a hurry to put it out there. In conclusion, the reliable analysis of any piece of historical evidence is a complex process. No decision regarding identity, parentage, origin, or other genealogical detail can be considered definitive, period. Read that again. No decision regarding identity, parentage, origin, or other genealogical detail can be considered definitive. Just as scientists revise their theories in the wake of new discoveries, so do genealogists and historians. Any decision we make today could be changed tomorrow by the discovery of a new record. Just keep all of that in mind. Okay, we are done with theory. You may be happy to hear that. We're going to go on to some case studies where we point out, where we show you with examples of how this plays out in real research. Are there any questions up to this point? Maybe everybody's asleep by this point. It's been pretty heavy sledding here. Okay, let's go on to hopefully the more interesting case studies. And I apologize, this is I feel like I'm showing home movies to you, but I'm sticking with my own research on my own family, because any research that I've done for clients, I really can't share with you. So we're going to stick with my family research. And this is the first part. The first case study is the Stell pedigree, part one. We've already looked at this in previous lessons. My father, William Stell, married my mother, Mary Moyer. William Stell's, my dad's father was Frederick Stell, and he married Anna Rittmeyer. Fred's father was James William Stell, and he married Amanda Brower. And James William Stell's father was William Stell, and he married Phoebe Marlin. All of this information I inherited. It was given to me by a combination of, it would have been, let's see, Anna's mother and Anna and Fred, my grandparents, and one great grandparent, Lillian. So there is, as we talked about, there's an assumption that these things are true. There's a familial trust, right? I trust that, Fred knew who his parents were. The William Stell and Phoebe Marlin, that was a little research needed to be done, and there were no sources given, and there were no footnotes given, and so they felt comfortable with it. I'm a little less sure about that when I receive it, but it's really good information. It's good to have a place to start. Here's an example of why sources are so important. So my grandmother, Anna, typed up a Stell family history, and in her family history, there were three brothers, Stell brothers from England that came to the United States. There was John, and there was William, and there was Robert. And John and William went on to live in Chicago, and Robert moved to Virginia and was never heard from again. I have no idea where my grandmother got Robert. I have found no evidence that a brother Robert that they had a brother Robert. I can find no evidence that Robert emigrated. Robert Stell emigrated with anybody, and I can know anyway. There's and because she doesn't tell me where she got that information, I can't evaluate it, and it's awful. I mean, I have to include the possibility that it's correct. All these years, I'm still, in the back of my mind, I'm looking, Robert, are you there, Robert? Whereas if she had included where she got that, I could have looked at that and said, oh, well, she got that because of this, and that was a mistake. So I can't evaluate it, and I can't dismiss it. And it's been a millstone around my neck for years, and it still is. And she may be right, because I have to remain open to that possibility. Okay, just another sermon on sources. Okay, that's part one. Now, is that proven? No, of course not. It's not proven. I got the family information. Then I went to what I tell you to do is, first thing you do is go to census records if you're in the United States and find them in every available census. And lo and behold, I found everybody that was in that list in every available census, and it seemed to be correct. I also ordered and got a hold of vital records, the birth, the marriage, and the death certificates. And all of those corroborated the family information that was given to me. There were no contradictions. There were no problems. It appeared to be true. The burial records and Find a Grave agreed. The books. So let me tell you about a book that I found on the Stell family. And I have to go way back for this one. When I first started doing research, it was because I was asked to work in a family history center in Virginia. And I didn't know anything about genealogy at the time, but I was in the library from 7 to 10 every Wednesday night. That was my job. And I would unlock the door, and I would open up the sign up binder, and I would be there to order records for anybody that wanted them. But I sat there and read a book while I was there. Eventually, I thought, no, why don't I use this time to do some research? So I actually looked to see if there were records that I could order from Salt Lake City. some films that I could order. And I started with the Stell line, and I looked, and there were no records in the area where the Stells were immediately from, but one sister had gone to a town in Colorado, and so I thought, oh, and there was a record that I could order, so I ordered that record just to look at the sister. Well, this is in Silverton, Colorado, and the book was called Hillside Cemetery. It was actually a film about the cemetery, and you're expecting, maybe a transcription of the gravestones or whatever. This was an amazing record that Frida Carly Peterson, the author of this book called Hillside Cemetery, spent years going through newspapers, interviewing family members, just using every possible source to write about everybody that was buried in that cemetery. Now, the sister was buried in that cemetery. I wasn't that interested in her. What I didn't know is that her mother was visiting her. And if you've ever been or know anything about Silverton, Colorado, it's at a really high altitude. She was visiting her and got sick and died while she was there. And there was no way to get in and get out. She was buried in Hillside Cemetery. So Frida Carly Peterson, the author of this book, researched the grandmother. The sister wasn't all that interesting to me, but the mother was my direct line. And she got all of this information. Has citations. It was a treasure. I've ordered the book. It's a 2-volume, huge book. And I've actually gone to Silverton and met Frida Carly Peterson to thank her. I didn't go there to thank her. We went on a family vacation, but I looked her up. She was there. I thanked her for her work because that was my catalyst. That I found that one record, which was a gold mine, and I was hooked. And I started ordering records. And of course I ordered 20 more, and nothing, was as good as that. Nothing has ever been as good as that, really. But that's what got me going. So that book, which is a compilation of lots of different sources that are cited, corroborated everything that my family had given me. Newspapers, those historical Colorado newspapers, corroborated everything in my family information. In other words, multiple independent sources corroborated my family information. Now that's a slam dunk by any definition. I've got a slam dunk with those generations. And of course the crowd cheers. It is so great when that happens, right? The slam dunk is something to celebrate. But with the next generation, as you know, William, I had a problem getting the Stells back to England. I had conflicting evidence. If you'll remember last week, William's marriage certificate showed his father as William when it was really James. I still have not found any one record that shows James as the father of William. So in other words, my solution, and I think it's a strong case, is the number 2 there. It's a lot of indirect evidence. It's a preponderance of the evidence. It's not the clear and convincing slam dunk. It's the preponderance of the evidence. 2 points scored, whether it's a slam dunk or whether it's, a layup. So let's look at the indirect evidence that convinced me that this was proven. So you remember the letter from William's daughter to William's son, in which she mentions that their father, William's mother and father, never left England. Their father had a brother who also lived in England and stayed. And that brother had a son named James. Okay. Then there was an Aunt Olive Mills and an Uncle John Stell. And then William, the father, were the only ones that came to the US, according to Sarah. And then at the very end, we learned that the brother that came was named Cockcroft Stell. So we've got 3 brothers, Cockcroft, John, and James, who come to the United States, who emigrate to the United States. I'm sorry, we've got 3 brothers. We've got William, we've got his brother John, we've got Cockcroft, we've got William, we've got John, and we've got Olive Mills, who all come to the United States. We've got Cockcroft, who stays in England and has a son named James. That's the information that I can glean from this letter, if it's accurate, and we're going to test that. Okay. So we find the 1841 census of James Stell. We find William there. We find Olive there. We don't see Cockcroft. We don't see John, but we see parents James and Sarah. Now, in the 1841 census, we do find John Stell. He's on the left with, apparently, again, 1841 doesn't give relationships, but apparently his wife was named Sally and he had 2 children, Mary, who was 3 years old, and Anne, who was 3 months old. Then on the right-hand side, on the second line, you can see Cockcroft Stell with wife Mary, presumed wife Mary, and presumed daughter Ruth Stell, who's 1 year old. So we've got, this doesn't tell us who their parents were, but it proves that these people existed, right? And it gives roughly their ages. Now, you can see that John Stell is the exact same age as Cockcroft Stell. That is a problem, but we know, again, with our knowledge of the 1841 census, we know that they rounded to the nearest 5, so it's not really a problem, but we do want to look for their real ages in other records. So I go to looking at these brothers because I need more evidence and I need to know what is going on. I need to know, first of all, if their parents are, what their parents' names are. So as we showed last week, here's the marriage record for Cockcroft Stell at the top there, married to Mary Woodhead. If you look on the right-hand side under father's name and surname, we see that his father's name was James, who was a joiner. So that is a piece of evidence. So this document, from this document, I'm extracting this piece of evidence, which is that Cockcroft Stell's father was James Stell, and that's my evidence for my research objective that I get from this source. I look further at Cockcroft Stell because I want to know more about him, not only to find his father's name, his parents' names, but the more I know about him, I want to see if I can disprove or prove. And so I want to see what I find out. So here's a list of his occupations that I found. In 1839, on his marriage certificate, he was a car man. There were no cars in 1839 that I know of, but I think that's the same as a carter, meaning that he hauled things around. He moved heavy pieces of furniture or things. He moved things for people. In 1841, the birth certificate of his daughter Ruth indicates that he was a carter. The 1841 census says that he was a power weaver, worsted, meaning, so there were hand loom weavers and there were power weavers, meaning the loom was powered by an engine, and worsted means it was wool. So he was a power weaver of wool. in 1841. 1846, the birth certificate of his son James indicates that he was a weaver. 1851 census says he was a power weaver. By 1861, he's a power loom overlooker. He's gone from being a weaver to being an overlooker or a supervisor. In 1866, the death certificate of his wife, Mary, he is a loom tackler. It's the same as a supervisor, but a tackler, he tackles problems with the loom. So he probably had some mechanical skills. If a loom broke down, it was his job to get it going again and get it going as quickly as possible. And he probably, who knows how many he oversaw at one time, but several looms were under his observation. And then on his death certificate, he was also listed as a power loom tackler, but of cotton. Okay, so I'm rounding out, I'm learning more about Cockcroft. None of these things showed his father's name, but I'm learning more about him. Other facts. His only son was named James. Okay, that corroborates the letter. I don't really care that his son's name was James, except that it corroborates that letter from Sarah as, okay, that piece she got right. The other thing that is interesting is that often in England, children would be named for parents and there was a birth order. And so the fact that he named his son James strengthens the possibility that his father's name was James. So we call that a nominal linkage. Okay, both of his children, James and Ruth, married after his death, and no one in his married family ever emigrated that I can tell, that I've been able to tell. They all lived and died in England. And I've found their places of death, so their burials. Okay, Cockcroft's wife, Mary. Mary was born in nearby Lancashire, the daughter of a weaver. She was a cotton reeler in 1839 at the time of their marriage, and in the 1841 census. The 1851 census indicates Mary had been confined to her bed for 4 years. The 1861 census shows that she had no occupation. And then she died 1st of January, 1866, age 52 years old, cause of death, rheumatism, 19 years certified. Onset 1847, that's 4 years before 1851 at age 33. Do we understand now why Cockcroft didn't emigrate? I know that William immigrated in 1849. By then, Mary's confined to bed. She's not going to emigrate. So they stayed in England. It doesn't tell me again, it doesn't prove the linkage to James, but it tells me a lot more about the reasons why and why not. Okay, let's look briefly at John Stell, the brother who did emigrate. He married Sally Sutcliffe, 6 August 1837. There's no marriage certificate. Civil registration started in 1837, and there wasn't full compliance, so there was no marriage certificate for him at that time. His daughter Hannah died 29 November 1839 at age 18 weeks of the whooping cough. Daughter Elizabeth died 19 January 1844 at age 5 months of pneumonia. Daughter Frances died 28 January 1846 at age 9 months of teething. Obviously, she didn't die of teething, but they used to think that teething was a malady that could kill you. Who knows what killed her, but what she died of. Daughters Mary, Anne, and Sarah lived to adulthood and emigrated with John before 1850. The youngest, Sarah, was born 21 March 1847, and Sarah, John's wife Sally, Sarah's mother, died 4 April 1847 from childbirth complications. So look at John here. He's had 6 daughters, 3 of whom have died, and then his wife died. and he's got 3 daughters. So what did he undoubtedly do? Well, he married again. The bottom marriage certificate is John Stell marrying Grace Crowther. It shows that he's a widower and she's a spinster. And it shows his father is James Stell. So that's really nice to get that another piece of confirmation that John, the brother of William, his father was James. Okay, findings. I also followed the other children of James Stell in the same way that I did with Cockcroft and John, including Olive Stell, who married John Mills in 1853 before their emigration. All provide further corroboration that William's father was James Stell. Nothing was found that contradicts this theory, except for that one letter or the one marriage certificate, right? And so there is a contradiction, but it stands alone in all the research that I've done. The letter has been corroborated. All the information appears to be correct. It's pretty amazing. She got it right. So that makes me, I can trust that. I can trust that letter. Okay, the discrepancy. Now, some cousins of mine have concluded that William's father was actually named James William, and that's why we find his name William on the marriage certificate, but everywhere else he's James. Okay, but I disagree. Why? First of all, middle names were not commonly given in the late 18th century. James was born about 1790. Middle names were given to rich people, to the peerage, to the head honchos. Not many. There, you just don't find them until the mid 1800s. Middle names came into vogue. So middle names were not common. And then in every other record that I found, the name is shown as James. There's no James W. There's no William J. Except for William's marriage record, all the other records show his name as James. That's what makes me think that it's likely that it's the marriage record that's just in error. Think about it. You're in Massachusetts and you're getting married. You've recently come from England. You've got a thick accent. Perhaps the minister doesn't. It's your wedding day. He's asking you questions. And is William thinking straight? Maybe not. Or maybe the minister's not thinking straight. You know, these errors can happen. So I believe that was an error, but I could be wrong. My cousins might be right. Okay, wrapping up. The final thing. Here is the marriage record of James Stell. James, not William. James, the father of William and John and Olive and all, and Cockcroft. James Stell married Sally Cockcroft. Does it surprise you that James Stell's wife's name was Sarah Sally Cockcroft? Well, their son was named Cockcroft. So here's another nominal linkage, another underpinning piece of evidence that confirms that what I found is true. So while I could not find one single record that said William's father was James Stell, I have not been able to find his baptismal record, his christening record anywhere. I'm not sure if he wasn't christened or if it was lost, or, you know, there was a lot of nonconformity in the area, and those records weren't kept quite as well. I've looked in nonconformist records that they do have, and he's not there. I'm not sure whether he wasn't christened or whether he was, but the record is missing. But whatever happened, there's no one record showing that William Stell's father was James Stell. And yet I feel as confident of that fact as I am as if I had found the christening record because of all the other indirect preponderance of the evidence reasons. So I think we've shown each instance that you could come up with and how you can be confident that you've got the right answer. And that's class for today. Are there any questions at all?
We're not all asleep, just so you know. There were things that were talked about in the chat, but it looks like everything was resolved
Okay,
unless anybody had something they wanted to say.
okay,
I'd like to review a little bit of my history, and maybe you can give me a hint. Would that be okay?
sure.
Okay. On my father's side, I have 3 Conrad Zieglers, and the youngest of the 2, I have evidence on, no problem. 1801 birth and a 1761 birth. Now, the Conrad before that, according to family lore and some evidence from a Lancaster County, Pennsylvania book of biographies, if you will.
Mhm.
The first Conrad supposedly came from Switzerland
Okay.
and landed in Philadelphia in 1752. I have evidence of a Conrad landing and the ship in Philadelphia, and he is swearing allegiance to Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Now, I don't have any evidence, two pieces that I really would love to find. One, the connection between, let's call him the 1852 Conrad and the 1761 Conrad
Mhm.
as his son. I need to look for that somehow.
Mhm.
And the other piece of evidence is back in Switzerland, if I can find any evidence of him in Switzerland. Other people who have done research on my ancestors and their own family trees suggest that the earliest Conrad was from Germany.
Ah.
And I don't see any hard evidence for that. So
Okay,
that's my dilemma currently. So any suggestions would be appreciated.
okay. My suggestion is to look at siblings and gather all the information from them that you can, starting with the ones in the 18, the later ones, because that information's more easily acquired. And filling out their lives. The answer, so in order to jump the pond, you're going to have to find a town that they're from. And it could be Germany, it could be Switzerland. My guess is that it's German speaking Switzerland, which would be a
Yes.
nice way to resolve that contradiction. There's a lot of research on Palatine immigrants to Pennsylvania, and that can be very helpful both in background sources and understanding the whys and wherefores, but sometimes it has some databases associated with that. But again, getting to prove that if the different, now I'm assuming, are you thinking that the 1850 Conrad is the son of the 1760 or a grandson?
I don't know, which, you mean 1752 or
I'm just
the
rounding
first
it up.
definite Conrad was 1761
Okay,
and his son was 1801. So
gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
and then he had a son, Conrad, also.
uh
Or
no, then it goes to different.
okay, okay. Well, I would still try to gather as much information about siblings, all the way back, and really firm that up. And that could give you, the best records at that time period for showing descendants would be a will, or a probate record of some kind. Land records are good to look at in that when a dad died, often the children got the land. And so there are different ways of, when you get back that far, it becomes problematic. But those are the principal records I would use to try to see if you can establish some kind of linkage there. And then the standard wisdom, and I've never found this to be untrue, is that to jump the pond, you're going to need to look in US records or in Pennsylvania records, colonial records. And that will give you the clue that you need to jump back and find the correct family. But you're going to need to find the town, at a minimum, the county, but preferably the town that they came from. The immigration record that you found that they came to Pennsylvania doesn't indicate the town, evidently. Is that right? Just says Switzerland?
Well, no, it doesn't even say Switzerland. I mean, that record of the 1752 when he landed in Philadelphia is just the ship record.
Gotcha.
It came from Rotterdam, I believe, and then to Philadelphia, and has the captain's name and so forth.
Okay. But you can't
it-
find them on
the-
the ship manifest, or it doesn't exist anymore?
No, it is part of a manifest, yeah, but I
Okay.
can't connect him to the 1761 Conrad. Was he his father or not?
I see.
See?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And then also the other evidence of Switzerland was just the mention of the ancestors of the Zieglers that's in the biographical book.
Mhm.
His ancestors were from the mountain country of Switzerland. That's
Okay.
the only definite lead there.
And when was that written? Do you know?
Early 1900s, the book.
Okay. There's a problem there because Germany was not a great place to be from at that time. So we might have said Switzerland when it was really Germany. So again, approach that book a little skeptically because of the bias against Germany at that time. I have an ancestor who was a loyalist in New York City. He was German, and Germans tended to be loyalists during the Revolution because the King of England was German, right? He was from Germany, and so they trusted George, and he eventually fled to Canada because of the Sons of Liberty making him uncomfortable being in the colonies, and they stayed in Canada until they went to Colorado in 1870s. So in different censuses, I can trace, in 1880, there he was, he was from U.S. and then 1900 he's of German ancestry, but that completely goes away. There's no German ancestry at a certain point because you just you didn't want to show that. So even though it was a very German name. Anyway, so it certainly could be Switzerland, and that's still my guess. But
well, just an interesting side point on that. My son was in Switzerland trying to do some research, and I went to the town of Schlafhausen, I believe it's called. And he actually photographed a Ziegler name, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was our Zieglers. There were a lot of Zieglers back then. It's amazing. Even in Pennsylvania, in the Pittsburgh area, there's a whole mess of them. Same in New York, Pennsylvania, but they're not connected to my history.
Yeah, and and another thing you could do is a DNA surname study of Ziegler. And I don't know, this is a good time to mention DNA surname studies. That's different than just going to 23andMe and getting your DNA test done. There are DNA surname studies where you can submit your DNA and they have enough. So everybody that joins submits their DNA and also what they know of their family tree. And so they can start to separate out the different Zieglers and where they came from. And that can be a really helpful tool when there are, multiple branches of Ziegler that aren't really related. Do you know, did Ziegler mean anything in German? Is that an occupation or
Yeah, a roofer basically refers to a
Okay.
roofer.
Very
Yeah.
good. So you're going to get a lot of roofers that aren't related, right? That there's no blood relation, right? And so a Ziegler surname study could help you find your line, and it could confirm perhaps that you are from Switzerland, so
Where do you do those studies? How do you get connected with surname?
Google DNA surname Ziegler. See what
Okay.
you find. And there's probably one. They're just all over the place. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one, but just look around.
Very
There-
good. Thank you for your help.
There's
Great.
no one place where all DNA surname studies are. So, and that's true for everybody. Those DNA surname studies are really, really amazing what you can find. So keep that in mind.
Sue, this is Connie. Good morning, and thank you again. Just a fabulous, fabulous presentation. And my comment or my situation is I wish that I had been aware of the information that you provided today about 20 years ago.
Me too.
Because I have all of the research and all of the data that I started gathering before I thought I would be so serious about it.
Yep.
And so I have all of this, formally gathered data that doesn't have citations. I have the documents, I have everything, I've gathered everything and kept collected
Yeah.
the documentation that drew me to my conclusions, but I've not done any citations. I've not done any written analysis. So what I've done is I've started doing that now, but I've got all of these years of other data.
Wow.
And so
Yeah.
I'm going back and trying to, some of it I had done like a narrative form because I'm trying to write like a little memoir or a little book, to share with family,
Right.
but not in a, legal citation type format.
Yep.
No footnotes or, things like that, but I'm showing my evidence.
Right.
So can you offer any suggestion? I would tend to guess I'm probably not the only one in this boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions or ideas about how to tackle the previous data that was gathered and then, moving forward and tying it all together?
Yeah. I would probably, it's going to be very easy for you to corroborate the information that you have, even if it's unsourced. Well, like my family information that I received that had no footnotes and no documentation. But I was able to corroborate and find that information was very reliable because I found corroboration in census records, in vital records, etc. And you can do the same with yourself. If you can find a database that says what you found, I don't know that I would concentrate a great deal on trying to find that, if you've got a photocopy of an image somewhere, I'm not sure I'd spend a great deal of time trying to find that exact image. But in the course of the corroboration process, you may come across it, right?
Yeah.
So that would be, you want citations for your work. You want to be able to explain why you think what you do. And because you know that you researched well and that you have reason to conclude the things that you have concluded, you'll find corroboration for that.
Well, what I did was I wrote small narratives for my own benefit, my own notes, so that when I would go back, because you go back and forth between lines and things because you find one thing that leads you somewhere, and so you go research that and then you come back. So I always wanted to have something to refresh my memory or keep me current. So I
Right.
made those type of little notes that's a form of cooperation, but it's not citing documents or anything that is more, I tend to think of it as more legalistic in its approach
Yeah.
or more academic in its presentation.
Right.
So
And really, it wouldn't take much. And I don't know if you're in the US. Are you in US research?
yes,
Okay. Then you're going to be able to corroborate what you've got pretty easily. Census records, vital records if they're around, newspaper, you're going to be able to find stuff to corroborate what you've got. And that's what I would do.
well, I have it all. It's all attached to the tree. I mean, the documents, every time I find a document and it's
Yeah.
all attached to the tree,
Yeah.
but I have
Gotcha.
not,
Yeah.
I have not offered any citation or any,
Gotcha.
that's what I'm saying is I haven't done any of that.
Understood. Okay, I understand now. I wouldn't worry about that because you've got the other documentation. So the purpose of showing your citation is so that someone looking at it can review it and can see if they agree with your conclusion. If you've got other evidence that supports those documents that are uncited, then you don't really need to worry about it because anybody looking at it will say, well, while that document itself didn't have any citations, she's got plenty of citations to prove what she's saying. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I've got the documents. I didn't write any narrative or have any citations that tied it all together, but looking at the individual elements of the documentation would lead a reasonable person to draw that same conclusion.
Exactly. So you're done. You've got it.
Okay. Oh,
I wouldn't
hallelujah.
worry about that. I wouldn't worry about that uncited document at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Sue, Gail asked a question. She said that she knows about U.S. ports of call that supported immigration ships like Ellis Island, and the Acadians landed in New Orleans. She knew something about the one in San Francisco, but wondered, are there other ports and are those immigration records available?
They are. Pennsylvania, Baltimore are principal ones on the East Coast. New York
Boston.
City. Castle Garden before Ellis Island came in kind of late. So if you haven't checked Castle Garden, there's some pretty good records at Castle Garden. That was the predecessor of Ellis Island.
Galveston was also
There you go.
an immigration port.
Yep. Yep. So there are a lot of them. I mean, San Francisco was too, from the West Coast, all over. You've got, I mean, Charleston, South Carolina.
Boston, Mass.
There you go. Thank you, Boston, Mass. I said Philly, right? And DC and Baltimore. Yeah. We're kind of at the mercy of, has Ancestry got a database for that? I've been disappointed at how little I've been able to find for my family and in my research. That may be, I mean, not all the records still exist. And the records that there are that have been digitized and indexed, the handwriting is poor. Chances are pretty good that they've been mistranscribed, in my opinion. So you need to be really, really creative in your searches for people. and I mean really creative, to find these records. A kind of a better record to look for, I think, that talks about the immigration would be naturalization papers. And those are more and more of those are available online. Family Search has a lot of them. Some of them are indexed, some of them aren't. You need to browse. But those will refer to the immigration. And if they became citizens, and you can find that, I believe in the 1900 and 1910 censuses, it says if they're US citizens. Try to find the port of entry, but as Bob's experience was, those ship manifests don't, some of them tell a lot. I mean, when you get to the 20th century, they are gold mines. But if it's earlier than 20th century immigration, it doesn't really tell a whole lot. I mean, it's always exciting to see your ancestor's name on a ship's manifest and to see who they were traveling with and to see, how much money they had in their pocket. It might say that if they were in steerage or, what their accommodations were on the boat. But it really doesn't tell all that much. Naturalization papers are really great. Those are being amassed by Family Search and Ancestry. They're court records, so they're in courthouses, and it's complicated because there are different levels of courts, and so it might be the Court of Common Pleas or even the Orphans Court, or so hard to know where to find it. So it's really wonderful that Family Search is making these court records, these naturalization court records available. But keep your eye out for that. That, to me, that for the earlier date, that tells you more than the actual immigration records do. Yeah. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Yep, that's good.
Great.
Any other questions from anybody?
If you've got a problem with your ancestry, now's the time to ask.
Bob just asked, is there one location on Family Search for naturalization records?
You'd go to Family Search search records, and you can go to the state and look for naturalization papers for the state or for the county, probably for the state, actually.
Yeah, I think you can search, when you search records, you browse all collections.
Yeah.
And then you can go by state and you can see any records that they have on there available
state.
for that state. And then some of them, like you said, are indexed, and others you just have to, look at the handwriting. So.
Yeah.
You might also go to the research wiki and the groups, research groups, and see if there's anything there that's of interest either for the locale or naturalization or whatever.
Yeah.
So the wiki theoretically will tell you what records are available right now. And that's it. Hopefully they keep them updated. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that's a great way of directing you, directing your search a little bit rather than just going to collection of naturalization records. Yeah. I was going to say something else about immigration, but I can't remember what it was. Oh well. Anything else, folks?
This was
Thank you.
amazing. This was such a great class, Sue. We're so grateful to you for sharing your, just like the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure, of what you've learned.
It's been a real pleasure for me. You've been a great group, and I've loved your participation and loved getting to know you a little bit, and hope we continue to see you.
Yeah, everybody, just so you know, we'll be doing these same classes again in September. You're welcome to come back for a refresher, or yeah, you're welcome to come back. I'm not sure if it's going to be exactly the same or if, but just know that go ahead and look on Lone Star and we will offer the classes again.
Chelsea, this is Connie.
Hi.
Can can y'all have longer classes? Can you take it out?
Are you
where the-
talking, well, what, you just mean offer more than 5 weeks? Or,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
I mean, the tricky part is just, you know, finding people that, you know, have the time or want to do that, to share their expertise. And so this was kind of a new thing for us. And that was, you know what, we actually all have Connie to thank for this, because we really, what we were doing before was the basics class, but we would offer breakout sessions in those basic classes in the basics class, so that you could learn more specific research about just the censuses or just naturalization records or whatever. And that was a nice thing to do, but then people felt like they wanted to go a step further and have longer than 20, 25 minutes of just kind of glossing over the basics. And so again, it's just finding somebody that wants to share what they've learned is the tricky part. So I think we're mostly interested in making sure people get started, and then you know, we haven't gotten much further than that yet, other than Sue, what she's done this time. But it's
Well,
definitely something to explore.
I do thank you for the basic class that I took last time, because the help sessions one-on-one was terrific.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Those are amazing.
yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, that's really what makes that class effective, because just to be able to have somebody help you with your own tree and your own questions is, oh, it's just super helpful and rewarding and getting you going. So that's why, yeah, we love that class. It's very well received. And please, you know, if you have specific topics that you're interested in, go ahead and email me, you know, respond to the email and let me know, because you know, we could certainly reach out to people and see if people are interested in a breakout class to teach about some of those topics. I can't guarantee that we would do them, but please let me know and I can look into it.
Oh my
Thank
gosh,
you.
there are so many topics that a breakout class. I mean,
Well,
you
and
know,
that's the thing, is you have to try to, I mean, given the audience, you know, and what we're trying to do here, we want to find something that appeals to a broad audience and not just one person. So it has to be something that, you know, and that's why when we did the breakout rooms, it was on really broad topics, like how to use the Browse All collections in Family Search, or how to, you know, like about using the wiki pages. That could be super helpful, because they're untapped, you know, there's untapped potential there. There's so much information there. And if we don't really know what's on it, we don't know how to access it, then, you know, it's not helpful. So those breakout classes are really, really important and useful. We just need to know what people are wanting to know about.
well, what I was thinking is something that is more basic. I mean, just take the census records, the US census records, and then say the European, or, you know, a large country that had or German, you know, those other census records. There is so much detail in all the individual US census records to do sort of a class that gives a background, and then what is covered in each census record. And just like Sue was talking about in, I guess it was the English census records, they rounded the ages up. Well, there are several little tricks or things that you wouldn't think about in the US census records that, you know, you don't know. You're just going in and looking for names. A lot of people don't take all those other columns and read the headings under them to see all the information that they can glean from it. So perhaps I'll just mention that as a thought.
Okay. Yeah, excellent idea. Thank you. Again, it would be helpful for me to send me an email of the things you're interested in, and then we could at least look into breakout sessions, where even if you came to the same class, but we had a breakout room and said, anyone that's interested in learning about this, feel free to go into this breakout room and you're going to learn about this, and maybe it even would be a longer instructional period, you know, an hour long or something.
Mhm.
But it's the tricky part is getting the ongoing, you know, long classes. It's just getting volunteers who have the time to do those, you know.
Understand.
But we can put some feelers out for sure. Or maybe you could teach one.
I'm,
Start setting up this summer and be ready for the fall.
well, thank you. Thank you.
You'd be great.
You're very kind.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so much, Sue. Thanks to everybody for coming. And she'll send this recording. We'll get this recording out as soon as we can to everybody. And just let us know if you have any questions.